Katherine Ozment is an author and someone who has what many would consider kind of a unique perspective on grace. This is religious language. I'll just go ahead and bring you in here, Katherine, right? We talk about grace. People automatically sort of think we're talking about grace in the religious sense, right?
Yes.
And are you religious or not?
No, I was raised quasi-religiously, I guess, in an amalgam of Christian, Protestant sort of practices and beliefs. And I left religion not really thinking much about it in my 20s, and I'm no longer religious at all.
But you're talking about grace. What's the story? What are you doing?
Well, it's interesting. So I wrote a book. I spent 3 years researching this dramatic rise of religiously unaffiliated people in the country, people like me, many were raised with religion and left. And one of the things I kept coming back to was, what are the things that religious people think we non-religious people don't have because we're no longer religious? And one of them is this idea of grace. There's a lot of different meanings and interpretations of that word. I decided to take that word and own it as a secular person. I decided that my life is as meaningful, as purposeful, as connected as people who are religious. But I do it in a different way. And so I sort of went on a journey to find secular grace, to find ways that the non-religious can connect with other people, can feel a deep sense of meaning in their lives and purpose, but without all the God stuff. And I think that, part of this time we're living in now, where there's so much change happening in this area, we need to kind of look at the terminology we've used to describe the most profound human experiences through time. They're all trapped in religious language. And I wanted to unlock that and say, I feel these deep connections, and it's all sort of in the here and now. It has nothing to do with God or an afterlife.
I'm being a little mischievous when I talk about grace in that context. I think we all are probably nodding our heads that we know what it means for someone to act in grace or in a gracious way.
Right.
But, from someone like myself, I don't know, you apparently had kind of you say an amalgam? Was it just like a cafeteria plan for God?
So my parents are divorced. My family's all from the Deep South, so down southwest corner of Arkansas, Presbyterian, Baptist. So we have all of that in our background. But then my father was Methodist. My parents divorced. My stepmother was Episcopalian. I ended up at one point in an all-girls Catholic school. So it kind of was a cafeteria. But it was just because when I was with different parts of the family, I was doing different things.
Do you think that seeing sort of a comparison of all the different practices of faith helped you to sort of see it for what it is? Like, hey, wait a minute, all these different flavors, they're kind of doing the same thing in different ways. Did that inform your exit from religion?
Well, I'll say I had a very striking feeling in that all-girls Catholic school when I was not allowed to go up and take communion because I wasn't Catholic. I was Protestant. That was when it really hit me for the first time that, oh, we're not all included, and this isn't really very open. Here's some girls who were sitting on the bleachers here in the gym and were not allowed to participate. I felt very sort of excluded, and I think that was the beginning of me feeling sort of the tribal nature of religion, which I didn't like.
I was just looking at a Facebook thread someone had posted. I think it was, this life will come to an end. Right? I know that I'm not going to live forever and that the universe doesn't care if I exist. And I think they were struggling with, for lack of a better word, meaninglessness. Mm-hmm. How do you deal with the question of meaning in a secular perspective?
Mm-hmm. Well, that was one of the things I went searching for, because that, in my 20s, when I really did decide, I don't think I believe in God, actually. I had long left the church and all those practices, but then it sort of hit me that I didn't think there was some divine reason for our existence. I didn't think we were part of some purpose and plan, and I actually went through a kind of a rocky time with that. And it's taken me all these years to come through it. And I think with the help of an understanding of secular humanism and this idea that meaning comes from this moment and this time and the connections we make here and now. We do have an expiration date. And so this is it. And so you're bound to make it even more meaningful because of that, and not hope that, things will get better once I die. that's a horrible way to live, right? So in some ways, this is a journey I've been on all my life, but it sort of came together for me as I wrote the book.
I felt that. Like when life became finite, every second became more precious,
Right.
Somebody had said, I think I may have mentioned this on a radio show last month, forgive the redundancy, but since we're speaking about it, I was like, I'm going to enjoy a delicious meal tonight, hopefully. And yet the meal is temporary, and I'm going to get hungry again. Perhaps I shouldn't enjoy the meal. I'm going to go and enjoy a temporary piece of music. Perhaps it has no merit because it will come to an end. We look at all of these things that, in many ways, the church frames that, if it doesn't last forever, how can it be of any worth or value? And it's kind of a tragic way to look at things.
Yeah. Well, and I interviewed Lawrence Krauss for this book, and I asked him this question, isn't it sad that we all die? And he said, well, of course, yeah, it's sad, but do you really want to live forever? I mean, do you really think about that? Think about how that would change your conception of things. And I think that is something that people who are not religious can't quite, or people who are religious can't quite understand that. And yet, I think it gives life more meaning.
Do you talk in your book about sort of this exodus from the church we're seeing, especially here in the last 30 years? I mean, churches getting desperate about the millennials are leaving, the 30 and under crowd are not interested in many ways in the religion of their parents, and stop the bleeding, right? Do you talk about this, and how do you frame it?
The whole book begins sort of with an exploration of that. I sort of set it up as this massive change that we're undergoing, unprecedented and really transformative for our society. And it begins with a moment I had with my son when he asked, we were watching this procession outside our window. We lived outside of Boston, and there was a Greek Orthodox church right near us. And there was a Good Friday procession one night, and he called me to the window to look at it. And after we watched this pretty amazing and very beautiful ceremony, and all the congregation went into the church and closed the doors, my son said, "What was that?" And I said, "Well, that was a religious ritual." And he said, "Well, why don't we do that?" And I said, because we're not Greek Orthodox. And he said, well, what are we? And I said, we're nothing. And in that moment, I felt enormous guilt and regret for not having a better answer for him. And so I started writing a magazine article. I was an editor at the time at Boston Magazine about people like me who are raising their kids without religion and what they tell them when they ask the big questions. And just as I started to write it, the Pew Foundation came out with those staggering numbers that 20% of the U.S. is no longer religiously affiliated and 33% of the millennials. That number's gone up. It's now 25 and 40%. So just in 5 years, that's changed already. And I knew when those numbers came out that this magazine article was really a book. It was really not about me and my son and our friends in Boston, which is like one of the most least religious cities in the country. It's actually happening everywhere. And in every state, the only group that is growing in all 50 states is the religiously unaffiliated, if you look at religion. And so suddenly I had this idea, this thing that had been nagging at me. And then I had, it's a national trend. This is a huge thing happening. And it's only, increased since I started writing it. So I go into that in the beginning of the book. And then the question I had after that was, well, what do we do? Okay, we left church. Now what? And where do we go to find those things that have been giving people comfort? And causing problems too. But religion has been providing, meeting needs of people for a long time. So how do we find some of those things?
Well, I want to come back to that. Let's go back to the statistics quickly. Mm-hmm. Non-religious doesn't mean they're atheist, right? It means that they're simply not engaged in religion. But before some people take those numbers and run off to create memes with them,
yes.
Let's talk a little bit more. I mean, these are people who may not be disbelievers, non-believers in God, but they're not religious people.
They're not attached to an institution. So this could include, this 25% number includes atheists, agnostics, the spiritual but not religious, lapsed Catholics. I mean, people who, many of them, the majority of them still believe in God. They may define it differently. They don't affiliate with a religious institution. So their way of sort of operating in the world is much more individualistic and less of a joining type of thing.
I remember hearing Dawkins talking about, using ritual for the sake of ritual, because it's a good way of framing human experience. It doesn't have to be rooted in, selling truth with a capital T, the truth of these superstitious beliefs, but the importance of ritual to the human species. You want to speak to that at all? I mean, we appear to crave it, right?
We do, and it also binds people together. There's really interesting research on this, and people have looked at religious and non-religious community groups. And religious groups with higher cost rituals last longer than those who have lower cost rituals. So imagine a Hasidic Jew who has to go through a lot of stuff to be a Hasidic Jew and show others that he's a Hasidic Jew. Those people are proving to the group that they're all in. And so the group can stay pretty pure because it doesn't have a lot of freeloaders coming in and sort of, hanging out for the cookies and the juice but not cleaning up or, helping out in other ways. And so the idea of ritual as bringing people together, I cite one study in the book where there was a fire walking demonstration going on, and the researchers measured the heart rates of the people watching and the people walking on the hot stones, and the heart rates became in sync with each other. That in this ritual, they literally, like in a physical way, joined. And so if you think about that, I mean, so much of religious practice is through these collective rituals. And a lot of what people told me they missed, even though they didn't believe in God anymore and they didn't want to go to church because of the politics and things like that, they really missed collective rituals, and they couldn't find those in a secular way other than maybe like a rock concert. They weren't finding the same kind of spiritual connection with others.
Dr. Andy Thompson had spoken to me about the function of religion in connecting human beings who were non-kin. And this is back, when we're on the African savannah and all that. But, the importance of having structure in this way to create a sense of community and family, which brings people together who may not be of the same lineage. Human beings then coming together to enjoy communal music and changes in brain activity when people are enjoying communal music. I mean, people have measured these things. It's striking.
Well, and it also, ritual is a way to communicate an idea without words. And so you can get across something in a powerful, sort of a visceral way through ritual that, it does something different than just speaking to someone or having someone read. And I interviewed a professor at Harvard who studies ritual in Chinese history, and he talks about how rituals worked among sort of the powerful people when there was a big changeover and something dramatic had happened. The leaders would come and stand in the formation of the celestial bodies. And they did that to reaffirm to everyone that we are sort of calling on ourselves to be our best, most harmonious people right now. And we'll become messy humans in a minute. But let us just use this ritual to remind ourselves of what we're capable of. And he calls this the as-if world. So ritual creates a world as if everything were possible. And so stepping into those rituals, once a week or whenever you're able, is a good way to remind ourselves to get out of our own heads and think about what is this thing we're going for? What are we trying to do here?
I can already hear the skeptic or even the cynic. Like, I left one religious enterprise. Why would I participate in rituals which seem so religious? Why would I do that, Katherine?
Right. Well, so they don't have to be religious. I went to a wonderful one in Northern California. I attended the final ceremony of a coming-of-age ritual at the Green Gulch Farm, which is a Zen Buddhist place. But this program for kids is actually non-religious. Anyone can go. And it started years ago when some parents there said they were raised Jewish. They'd been bar and bat mitzvahed. And they wanted their kids to have that, but they didn't want any of the God. They didn't want the Judaism. They just didn't need all that. But they wanted a ceremony to celebrate an important passage of time. And so now Green Gulch has this coming of age program where kids explore different important values in nature. So every month they go out with their mentors and they'll talk about honesty, responsibility, commitment, things we want our kids to, think about as they become adults. And I went to the closing ceremony, and one of the things they do there is they ask each teen what is the gift they're going to give the world. I mean, that's a ritual I can buy into that. My son is 14. I've never asked him, what is the gift you're going to give to the world, right? I've never been in a situation to even think about that, and neither has he. But here they've created this as-if world where they do that. And so these teens are forced into sort of got to be a little reflective. That ritual, I mean, if people have a problem with that, that's fine. I'll do it. But I think that's a good one.
Your husband was raised in Judaism, is that right?
Exactly.
Do those practices, does he practice a sort of secular, I don't know, is he even a secular person?
Yeah, we're both the same. I mean, we had both left religion by the time we met. In fact, he left the day after his bar mitzvah. So he just, there was nothing there for him, but I think he likes the tradition. And a lot of Jews are cultural Jews, not religious Jews. So we do very secular Jewish holidays with family friends. And it's more about the history of the Jews than the religious belief, and of course our kids are all like, what's this, God stuff. And so we explain, well, this is what they believe. Your ancestors may have believed it. But we're just trying to get some of the culture into our lives so we don't forget it.
Talking here with Katherine Ozment. She is author of the book, Grace Without God. Any of that ever get sticky with the actually religious family? Oh, we'd like to practice, but we're not going to do the God stuff. Does that get weird at all, may I ask?
Yeah, people are pretty hands-off. My family's we're very conflict averse, luckily. But I will say, before we got married, a number of people asked us, well, what are you going to do about the kids? And we're kind of blasé about it. We'll figure something out. And at that time, I think we thought we'd become Unitarians or Quakers. I don't know. We thought we'd find something like really perfect for the combination. And then, years went on and on and on, and there really wasn't a good fit for us. My husband was not going to go to a Unitarian church because it feels like a church. And so that's when the book came up with my son's question of what are we? And I realized we sort of dropped the ball on that. But since my book comes out, there have been some family members that haven't really commented on it. So I'll just let them think what they think.
Am I to infer then that tradition, ritual isn't as important to your spouse as it is to maybe you and your son?
Well, I think he really likes the cultural, traditions of Judaism, which in some ways are richer than those of Christianity that I brought. That's my doctor.
He'll participate though in those, but he won't go to a Unitarian church. So I'm trying to figure out, how that differentiation is made.
I think a part of Judaism is a feeling of, at least for him, of being separate from that and in something of a minority. And to be in the church, I think would feel, like it's a little bit of a different feeling, I think, because of the history.
All right.
Of Jews, yeah.
Fair enough. As a parent, do you find yourself struggling with how much of your own rejection of God or gods speaks to what you tell your kids? How do you approach parenting as a secular person?
Well, that's why this book was really good to write, because I used to just ignore their questions and shunt them off to clean their rooms. When they asked, what happens when we die? Is there a God? So-and-so says there a God. Am I supposed to believe in Jesus? And I would just be like, go brush your teeth.
Go ask your father. That's what I normally would hear. Yeah.
And as I started to go down this rabbit hole of the religiously unaffiliated, like across this country, I found so many examples of how to do it right, and how to just be honest and just say, I believe this and your grandmother believes this. And someday you'll decide what you believe. And so that we have really open conversations about all of these things now, because I realize, and I think that's a sticky point for secular parents because we don't want to proselytize. And I realized I could tell what I believed without proselytizing. And so I had to figure out how to do that so that they can grow up knowing that what they end up believing is fine with me.
They have ownership of it. It wasn't spoon-fed to them by somebody else.
Yeah. I met a guy, he's at the end of the book at the American Atheist Convention in Memphis a couple of years ago. And he was raised, I can't remember exactly, but it was extremely conservative religious group. And he raised his kids that way. And he said, and I said to him, I said, I feel so bad. I told my son we're nothing. We're not, they don't know anything about religion. And, I just went on the whole spiel of all my maternal guilt. And he said, I wish I could have done it the way you're doing it. And he said, I wish I could have all those Sundays back. And I thought that was really important to hear that, some religious upbringings are fine and they give people a lot. Like my husband, up until his bar mitzvah, I think, got something out of it. And some are really not. And so it's okay for parents to sort of figure out what works for them and their kids. Grace
without God. Would this translate in many ways to humanism? Would that be an accurate way to sort of, am I taking a leap there? If I demonstrate grace toward other people, does that speak to humanism, I guess?
Yeah, I think so. I think, it's funny because I knew humanism as kind of an academic term when I started this book. And when I told my son we were nothing, I didn't really know what I was. And so someone said I should go on BeliefNet and take the Beliefomatic quiz. And so I did. You answer like 10 questions, and then it shoots you an email immediately.
You're going straight to hell, Catherine. I'm sure I can see the result.
Well, some people might think that's what this email said. It said I was 100% secular humanist. And I was like, oh, that's what I am? And okay, let's learn about this. And that's part of the journey I took.
You're getting positive feedback after the release of this. I mean, are you getting pushback? Are you getting positives? What's the response?
It's funny. I get a little pushback at either extreme. So some people think I'm too kind to religion in my book. And some people think, I'm too horrible to religion in this book. And then most people in the middle see, I think there's a lot of people like me. They didn't leave religion because of some trauma or a deep hatred of religion or anything. I didn't have a bad experience with religion. It didn't stick. And so I think the book appeals to people who aren't upset about religion necessarily. I try to talk about, from my perspective and sort of my family's history and sort of my understanding through different sort of academic realms that I explored, is what religion does, what it's good at. And it's like this mechanism that has incredible power. And so I tried to look at it from that perspective. And I felt like the I Hate Religion books had already been written, and they're out there. And I wasn't going to write that book. And so I think some people think, oh, you're just a sellout. You're not really taking a stand. But I think it is a stand. It's just not extreme.
You might hear someone like myself say that because the church is really good at something, it doesn't mean it's necessarily good that they're doing it. Do you take the position, hey, it makes people feel better, gives them a sense of purpose, they love it, it fills their heart. Do you take that stand with religion?
Yeah, I think that's a tricky one. I think in some, especially poor communities, church serves a real purpose, economically. It can galvanize people politically to sort of stand up and get out and vote, for one thing. So I have a hard time judging people really on that. I mean, where it starts to bother me is when it crosses over into politics. It starts to affect other people. But, who am I, this privileged white woman, to say, you shouldn't go to church? That might be all you got in your community, and so I think it's tricky. I'm a little hesitant to judge people on that.
You're being so nice. You're just too nice, Catherine.
Well, I was raised a good Christian. What can I say?
That's a whole lot. What you and I covered over the last 2 minutes is a whole other show, right? We talk about the merits of what the church does and does not provide. I totally understand what you're saying. I think it's one of the reasons why when many ask me what we can be doing as humanists to make superstition less relevant, it's to help meet the needs that the church is meeting. The reason that we see so many in poverty who are so highly churched, it's because they get a sense of community and even financial support and groceries at their door. And if nothing else, the hope of a beautiful afterlife. Hey, life sucks today, but one day I'll be in a mansion in heaven. I mean, this is hugely attractive to people who are going through moments of pain and confusion and fear of death and all these other things. And we as humanists, I think, can do a much better job of trying to be the net that these people fall into, demonstrating grace without God. I think that has merit.
Well, it's true that the poorest countries in the world are the most religious. And one study shows that you can even determine a country's level of religiosity if you study its gross national product, how much AIDS prevention it provides within the society, things like that. If your existential needs aren't being met by your government, by your civic community, then you'll turn to religion. And those are the countries that have the highest belief in God. And so, you've got to be able to replace that with something and valid things that give people all that stuff they need to live, good lives.
You'll forgive me finishing with kind of a Barbara Walters question here, but to borrow from the subtitle of your book, do you have meaning and purpose in your life right now?
I feel I do, yeah. And I'm not a joiner, so it's not like I'm attending a Sunday assembly every weekend or something. I explored all these groups while I was writing the book, but I feel that I'm part of that net now, and I and I don't actually have one of those groups near where I live here in Chicago, but I feel a connection to people like you and all the people I've met at the different community groups I've gone and spoken to. But also, I developed sort of a philosophy of life that is this grace without God, that I am so aware now of the wonder that I feel in very simple moments every day. And I think the heightened awareness of that through the process of researching this book has given my life the meaning I was craving.
Katherine Ozment, author of the book Grace Without God, which I will link in the description box of this show. All success with the book. It's been a pleasure to be able to talk to you, Katherine. Thank you so much.
Thank you.